You know, when you think about your daily bread, that bowl of pasta you love, or even your morning cereal, they all start out as simple grains. But that journey from a field to your kitchen, it can get pretty complicated. And sometimes things get added or hidden along the way. So today, we're going to dive into the world of grain adulteration.
It's a pretty straightforward question, right? But the answer? Well, it can be shockingly complex. We're about to pull back the curtain on what it means for our most basic foods to be compromised, often in ways we can't even see.
Okay, so first things first, let's get a clearer definition down. The word adulterant sounds pretty intense, and it is, but it's also way broader than you might think. We're not just talking about adding poison here. It can be literally anything that makes food unsafe, or subpar, or even just plain misleading. Let's keep this definition in mind as we go.
All right, first up, let's tackle what I think is the scariest category, the invisible threats. These are the chemical and biological nasties that can build up in grains while they're growing, being harvested, or just sitting in storage, and they pose a direct risk to our health.
A huge one here is something called mycotoxins, which are basically poisons produced by mold. And as you can see, different grains are vulnerable to different kinds. You've got aflatoxins in rice and maize that can be carcinogenic. Then there's stuff like Ochratoxin A, which can mess with your kidneys, and the Ergot alkaloids in rye that, way back when, caused a pretty horrifying disease called ergotism. And just to really hammer home how serious this is, get this. This source material says that one specific type, Aflatoxin B1, isn't just a carcinogen, it's considered the most powerful one known to science. That is a truly chilling fact for something found in our staple foods.
So, how in the world do you fight back against these fungi? Well, the number one defense is control. It all comes down to moisture. Keeping stored grains dry, specifically below a 14% moisture content, is the absolute most critical step to stop these mycotoxin-producing molds from growing in the first place.
But look, fungi aren't the only problem. Pests are a massive issue for stored grain, so to fight them off, grains are often fumigated. Now, this solves the pest problem, but it introduces a whole new potential issue: chemical residues left behind on our food.
And just look at the chemicals we're talking about here. This isn't your average household cleaner. We're talking about things like hydrogen cyanide and ethylene oxide. I mean, sure, they're effective at protecting our food supply, but it's a pretty stark reminder of the powerful substances that are part of getting grain from a silo to your shelf. And the scale of all this chemical management is just immense. Regulators have had to set legal tolerance limits for 149 different pesticide residues in our food. That number isn't just big, it shows you the enormous challenge of making sure our food is safe from this huge cocktail of chemicals, even at microscopic levels.
And believe it or not, the threats don't even stop after storage. Even the processing can introduce contaminants. Drying grains with combustion gases, for example, can add something called PAHs. And the super high heat used to bake things like fancy breads and cakes can create acrylamide. Yep, another potential carcinogen. So everything we've talked about so far is, mostly unintentional contamination. But there's a whole other side to this coin: deliberate economic adulteration. This is where the motive shifts from just protecting the food to pure profit, and it's almost always at our expense. A classic example of this is bleaching flour. Flour naturally has this kind of yellowish color, but by adding chemical bleaching agents, that color gets totally stripped away. The goal isn't to make it safer or healthier, it's all about making it look purer, or maybe to hide the fact that they used lower-grade wheat. So the crucial point is, this has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with perception. The legal definition of adulteration actually includes any action taken to make a product appear better or of greater value than it really is. Bleaching, it fits that description to a T.
Then you have substitution. This is when cheaper ingredients are mixed in just to bulk up a product. For instance, they might add something called pre-gelatinized flour, which is basically just a starch that soaks up a ton of water. This increases the weight of the final product, which means you're paying for water instead of actual grain.
And sometimes the fraud is a lot less sophisticated. Simply not cleaning the grain properly and letting insect-infested, rotten, or just plain filthy stuff get milled and sold, that's also a form of adulteration. It's selling a garbage product as if it were clean and safe.
So, what's the big takeaway here? When you put all the invisible dangers and the economic fraud together, you start to see this core conflict that's right at the heart of our food system.
At the end of the day, this is what it all boils down to. It's this constant tug of war between the need to protect public health from all these contaminants and the economic pressure to produce food as cheaply as possible, which sometimes means cutting corners or hiding flaws.
So ultimately, the threat to our grains is coming from two different directions. You've got the hidden biological and chemical dangers that we need science to protect us from, and then you have the man-made deceptions, driven purely by profit, that we need regulation and transparency to fight.
Which, brings us right back to where we started. That journey from the field to our fork is just filled with these hidden pressures and compromises, and just being aware of them is the first step toward demanding a safer, more honest food supply. It really makes you think twice about what's on your plate, doesn't it?